And the first demo is about build variants and more specifically how to debug them. So I know some of you are already using build variants, others may not even know what they are. So maybe a brief recap of what build variant feature is about. So basically, if you are building multiple variants of your applications, you can end up in a situation where you need to create because it's time consuming and cumbersome, but also it's a bit tricky sometimes to know which TC should I build when you have many to choose from. So the build variants feature solve that problem by allowing you to have a small set, maybe even one TC in the simplest case. And then that TC only contains the common properties that are common for all your application variants. Then you dynamically at build time add the necessary variations by modifying TC properties on the fly. So those modifications happens at build time and they are never persisted anywhere. But since they are happen automatically, then you can, it basically becomes much easier to maintain your build system. And there are two kinds, and the way it's done is by means of scripts. So you write small scripts in JavaScript that will do the manipulation of the TC files. And there are two kinds of scripts. One script, which is I'm showing here on the screen right now, is the top script that defines what variants exist. And the entry point here is called init build variants, and it will basically build up a small data structure consisting of some objects here. These objects are then rendered by the artist user interface when you're building a TC. So here, for example, I have created a few variables for target platform, target configuration, debug print, etc. And then I'm just adding them here in this init build variants. I need also to enable build variants, and that I do in the preferences. Need to check this checkbox here under real-time development, build transformations, C++. And here I need to point out the path to this top-level script, buildvariants.js. And as soon as you've done that and you right-click on a TC and do build, you will get an extra user interface coming up. So everything that is within this build variants group here is populated dynamically by interpreting this JavaScript. So you can see we added a drop down here to select some items, another drop down here. We have some checkboxes, etc. And you can imagine that in this case, we have like 3 options here, 2 options here, 2 here, 2 here, 2 here, and 2 here. If you multiply all of these combinations, you end up in a quite big number of TCs that you would have to maintain if you didn't use build variants and prefer to have static TC files for all of these variants. Then the way it works is that each of these UI options reference another JavaScript, which will be invoked if you select that particular option in the UI. And that JavaScript, like in this case, target platform.js, if we look at that, this is called by the model compiler at build time to modify the TC on the fly. For example, this function called post process will get invoked. You get some arguments here, and then you can basically do whatever you like with those arguments. Like in this case, for example, I will set the compilation make type depending on the choice I made in the UI. And there are some other examples here also that you can look at. By the way, this example that I'm looking at here, showing here, is the one that is present in our documentation. So some of you may have already have seen it. So the important thing here is that the build variant scripts are run both. Some of them are run in the UI when I invoke build here in the context menu. Some are run by the model compiler when, for example, also when running from the command line. So now if we're going to think about debugging, this is important because the way to debug it becomes slightly different in those two scenarios. And first of all, why do we need to debug them? Well, in simple cases like this one, where we're simply just adding a few, creating some variables and then adding them like this, here the code is maybe so simple so that we don't need to debug. We could, for example, use a function to print out traces instead, like bwf or bf.info is an example of such a function. But if we look here, for example, we see that now it becomes slightly more complex. We have a for loop, we may have some if statements, maybe something doesn't work the way we intended it to work. You can print out things here also if you want, but it becomes more efficient to do real debugging in some cases. And the way you debug is described in a new documentation page that is, I will show you here. This is under Artist Users Guide. If you go down under articles, build variants, there is a new chapter here called debugging that basically goes through how you can debug these JavaScripts. What is important to understand is that the JavaScripts are interpreted by a Java library called Nashorn, and not all debuggers support Nashorn. And the one that is most commonly used for this purpose is called NetBeans. So it's I would say similar to Eclipse basically, but it's not Eclipse. Unfortunately, Eclipse itself cannot debug these scripts. But the way you debug them is the same as you would debug Java. So you need to add a line here to the JVM, an argument. This one you need to provide either in eclipse.ini in case you're debugging in the context of Eclipse, or to the model compiler command line in case you're debugging from the command line in the model compiler. But once you've done that, then debugging is pretty straightforward. So let us look at it. And I have already started here NetBeans. So this is Apache NetBeans, the latest version that I just installed. And then I have also updated my eclipse.ini. So I added the line here at the bottom that you can see. Basically, this tells us that we want to do debug on port using port 8000. Suspend equals n means that we don't want to wait until the debugger attach, just let it run at full speed from the beginning. That's useful for Eclipse because here we don't need to debug until we actually right click on a TC and build it. So the first thing we want to do to debug is to put a breakpoint, and the way to put breakpoints programmatically, which we need to do here, is to type debugger semicolon. This will kind of tell the debugger that when we come to this line, break into the debugger and suspend the execution there. So I put my breakpoint here in this init build variants. Then I need to attach to my Eclipse. And here I just need to specify the same port as I used in eclipse.ini, so port 8000. I press OK, and now NetBeans attaches to Eclipse. Then I can go here and I can right-click my TC just like before and do build. And now you see it flashes down here showing that now control was transferred to NetBeans. So now Eclipse is suspended and it hits this breakpoint that I added in my build variant file, init build variants. And now this is like any debugger, you can use hover over here to inspect the value of certain variables. You can use the variables view, expand them here, and here you can see, for example, which TC did I get here. And there are some other properties that you can explore like this. Note that this breakpoint, or that's not a break, but that's the macro, but there is a way to double click here, just like in Eclipse to put breakpoints, but that's not the way you set breakpoints. The only way to do it is to set them like this. So I recommend putting in some debugger statements at places where you suspect there is a problem, and then debug from there. And when you want to run to the next breakpoint, you just press this continue button and it will jump to the next place. Now I can just continue here, and then control is transferred back here, and we get this dialog popping up as before. So that's how we can debug build variants inside Eclipse. Now let's look at doing the same from the model compiler command line. And to do that, we first need to get the command line invocation of the model compiler. And I hope you know that this is printed in the model compiler console. So just go to the model, just build the TC as usual, go to the model compiler console, and then you will see this printout saying use this command line to perform the same task with standalone model compiler. And here you get then a very long command line task that or command line that you just can copy and paste into a console window. And I've done that already. So if I go here, and here you see I have that long command pasted, and you can see here in the beginning I added this same thing as I had in my eclipse.ini. Here I'm using port 8001 to don't get a clash, because I'm already running Eclipse on port 8000. And then I've changed so that it now says suspend equals yes. This is good because the model compiler runs quickly. So if I don't put yes there, it means it may run so fast I don't have time to attach to it from NetBeans. Now if I start it like this, you see it just says listening for transport TT socket at address 8001. Now I have plenty of time here to go to NetBeans. I can stop this debug session and I can start another one. Before I do that, I should insert some breakpoints. In the same way as before, I will do it by putting a breakpoint here and maybe down here. Like this. And then we can attach the debugger to it. Now I'm going to use 8001. Press OK. And now you see that if we go here, now you see that the model compiler starts to run. It does its usual job. And at some point, it will come into my build variant script. You notice that this init build variants is also called by the model compiler. And the reason, of course, is that it also needs to know what variants of build variants has the user defined here and wants to use. But let's skip from this one and press continue, and then we will hit another breakpoint here in post process. So this function is specific for that's only run at build time when we are actually building the TC. And here I can now, for example, here I can put my mouse and see that now this comes for the choice Win64 min WG. I think this actually was specified in this command line somewhere. Yeah, here you see it. That this is how we specify build variants on the command line using the ---- build config argument, same as that corresponds to the UI you saw in Eclipse. Another useful thing is that you can evaluate expressions here. So you can, for example, select something like this, and then just put the mouse over. Here you see this is GCC, meaning that we will go into this if statement below here. And you can use, of course, all the other features here in the NetBeans debugger to troubleshoot why your build variant script doesn't work the way you want it to work. Then you can press this one to jump to the next breakpoint. And when you are done, you can just either press continue or maybe terminate if you found a bug and want to fix that. And you see we come here several times since we're inside a for loop, and we will iterate over all these. I think it's 4 TCs in this case that it will iterate over. So I will not debug more now, but I think you understand how it can be used, this feature.